I'm just a little technical difficulties, but I think I'm pretty much ready if everybody else is. Yeah. Okay.
I'm recording.
Great. Okay, so my name is Jason Roth. I am the Seek and Find coordinator, and like yesterday in my presentation, that's not as fun as it sounds. I don't coordinate hide and seek games. Seek and Find is the name of our consortium, SEK for Southeast Kansas, and then Find, so you can find what you're looking for in our catalog. I work for the Southeast Kansas Library System, which is a 15-county regional system in Southeast Kansas. And we service many libraries. Our consortium is 43 libraries, 42 publics, and we have one community college library, which always makes things a little fun because we have to be flexible. And then we have 2 other libraries coming up soon. We've got a retrospective conversion coming up with a very small library, and then we're importing one mid-October from another system. So I covered a little bit of this. Today I'm talking about new item sharing. This is probably more pertinent to consortia than it is to other people, but it's still an interesting thing that it was one of those things when they sent out the request for proposals was show us something you didn't ever know about Koha. So for me, it was the holds policies. The holds policies were forbidden when I started my job. My predecessor said they didn't work and never touched them. And then a few years down the road, Heather at Nichols came along and said, why aren't you using that? This works perfectly. So that's when we started really looking more into that. But there were other things that we need to check off the list before we could fully use it to its full potential. So as far as our collection goes, we have about 25 libraries that have collections under 10,000 items. A lot of those libraries don't actively purchase items or actively contribute to the consortium. So when they do get money to get new items, they just don't want to share them. They want them on their shelves for their patrons. The bulk of our libraries are in that lower zone there. You can see that it kind of goes up. The boxes where like over 90,000, we've only got one library. In the 70 to 80, we've only got one library. We've got a few really big libraries for us. I know there's like huge libraries out there. And then we've got a lot of small libraries and a few medium libraries. The benefit, the main thing our consortium does for our libraries is access. So those very small libraries gain access to 700,000 items. The very large libraries, they're getting more value in their purchases. It's not just sitting on their shelf, it's going out, it's circulating longer, hitting more people. So in the gradient there, the large libraries are generally the ones that say, yeah, sure, take my new stuff, it's fine. I've got lots of other new stuff, my new shelf is never empty. The smaller libraries, on the other hand, they want that browsing shelf, and it's usually just a shelf. So when that's empty and their patrons come in, they're like, what are you doing with your money? It doesn't show. So we wanted to come up with a way that accommodated those small libraries while still being fair to the larger libraries. So the problems that we've come across with new item sharing. The first is the lack of local priority, which is something that has been solved. And we'll go through each one of these problems and how we kind of solved it. The desire for local browsing shelves, again, those small libraries really want a way to keep all their stuff in-house. It goes against our mission as a consortium, but we still want to accommodate as much as we can without just completely exiling libraries so that they don't feel like they're welcome in the consortium anymore. Lack of clarity and transparency was a big one. So we have the rogue libraries that just don't share, and they're never gonna share their new stuff. They have a back office, and there's all their new stuff on the shelf, and then they have a little box of cards, and they're just writing everything down, and that's exactly not what we want. So one thing we wanted to do is create clarity and transparency so that the patrons are aware of what's going on. If they put a hold on one of those items that does get cataloged, but doesn't get shared, the patrons know that it's going to be a while. So we developed a small solution for that. And then lack of policy enforcement. So we do have policies in place for new item sharing, and they've evolved over time, which is what this timeline shows. So you'll notice in my presentation, I'm going to keep the problems up there, and I'm going to put the timeline at the bottom because it is kind of, it's been tricky for me to track, so I just wanted to kind of keep a little bouncing ball along the presentation. And if at any time this is super confusing, just tell me to stop and back up, and I can try and re-explain what's going on. So as far as the solution progression goes, we started with a written policy in what I'm calling the dark ages. Our consortium started in 2008 on Koha, and we've been through 2 major migrations, technically 3 support companies. We started at PTFS, and then some stuff happened that some of you know, and our servers remained with them, but our support migrated to PTFS Europe, which was great. They were great people, but they didn't have access to our servers, and there was time difference. So in 2013, we migrated to Bywater, and everything has been pretty great since. But back when we were with PTFS, we had written our policy out on new item sharing. And that policy relied on a loss status called local availability only, with local availability only. And that's what we used for the longest time. Also in the dark ages, we were never really upgraded. I think we sat on 3.6 or 3.8 for a long, long time. So we didn't ever get added functionality to improve this. So we kind of just got stuck in our ways and got stuck using this loss status. And I'll go into each of these steps in a little more detail. When we did get upgraded to 3.18, we put into place the transport cost matrix. And then with the advent of local hold prioritization, 320, we turned that on and got rid of our loss status. And then from there, things kind of built up. We employed those holds policies that I said we didn't really know worked. And then the final piece of the puzzle kind of was the automatic item modifications by age. So to break that down a little more, the original policy with local availability only was that non-shared items had to have that status. So any library wanting to keep their new items in-house for a 6-week period, which is what our policy committee had decided on, would, when they first catalog the item, put it in local availability only. What that did, as a loss status, it restricted holds, so patrons within the consortium couldn't put holds on them, and it basically created a dusty shelf of books. So if you have something in a loss status and it never circulates, then it just sits on the shelf. Even if people want it, they can't have it. The part to appease the people that did share their new items was, of our policy, was that if a library used that status, then all of their libraries in the consortium had permission to not share their new items. So that was kind of the reciprocal ILL borrowing in action. The problem with all of that is that Koha didn't at the time have a way to actually enforce that policy. So our staff was left kind of managing everything behind the scenes. People would notoriously leave local availability only on for much longer than 6 weeks. It just didn't cross their mind to go in and change it, or they were intentionally, maliciously doing it. We can't say which, but there were lots of problems with this. So it worked on the surface, but it didn't really work underneath. And here I list those out. So the misuse of the status was one of the major problems. People would just put anything and everything in that status they didn't want to share. Because it was titled local availability only, some people thought that's just for my stuff. that I'm keeping in-house. So I'm going to put my entire genealogy collection in local availability only, where we actually have a doesn't circulate status for fragile old items that don't go out on the courier. But they just didn't understand, and that made more sense. So that was one of the reasons I personally didn't like it. Manual regulation and no regulation, that's basically what happened. I mean, people would put their statuses on and just leave them. So holds would stagnate. Now, using a lost status, it worked sort of because we wanted them to check it out, put it on their browsing shelf, a patron would come in, check it out. When they checked it in, the hold status would go away and it would flow into the holds. So if there was a big shared record, lots of libraries were sharing theirs, but one library wasn't, then we would hope that with that hold list on there, once it came back, they would just send it into the flow. We always just say, let Koha work, let Koha be Koha. The problem with that is people would check their items in, the hold would pop up, and then they'd go immediately back and place the status on again. Eventually, that led to, again, a shelf of dusty books that had holds people wanted, but they weren't getting filled. And that's directly leading to subversion of sharing, which is our policy and our mission as a consortium. And then again, there was no way to reinforce that piece in our policy that said, if you don't share, then you're not going to be able to request new stuff, other than the staff at those non-sharing libraries were instructed to not put holds on new items. Okay, so the next step, while that was still active, was the introduction of the transport cost matrix. This wasn't really employed as like a immediate solution to the problem, but it did allow us to fine-tune the flow of requests. So we could say, so the Southeast Kansas Library System and the Iowa Public Library share a building, and we also share a collection. SDK has a fund, and we put money in, and then it sets on the shelves at the Iowa Public Library. So with the transport cost matrix, we were able to say, put us at the top, put Iowa at the top. We can fill all the requests that come in first, and take the burden off the other libraries. And then from there, we can trickle down to the larger libraries. On the original graph, we kind of used that. We also looked at open days, courier routes, and just kind of calculated it out and came up with about 5 tiers of libraries. So the bigger libraries are getting more requests than the smaller libraries. And that kind of took some of the burden off of filling holds from the libraries that wanted to keep their new items longer. But it didn't do anything like sticky. So this was just a rough solution. The real reason, one of the real reasons is when we started testing local holds prioritization, it just didn't seem to work right until we did establish the transport cost matrix. And I don't know if that's a bug or if it's just something that went wonky in our testing. I know that every time I tested it prior to engaging the transport cost matrix, it would, the holds would be prioritized correctly, and then the hold queue would refresh, and then it would just go wacky. But once we put this in place, it worked. And this is my lovely diagram of figuring out how that flow will work. It's posted in my cubicle as a constant reminder of how much fun that was to build. So local holds prioritization. This is where we start getting into the actual solutions to the problems. The local holds prioritization is one of the greatest things. We were a consortium in our situation. So what it does is it takes, it looks at for us, we've set it this way. So give priority to filling holds for the pickup library matches the home library of the item. So as a consortium, we always say anybody with a card in the consortium can check out any book at any library. We want that free, open flow. So with that in mind, some libraries set their home library at one library, and then they are constant users at another one, and they always want to pick up their items somewhere else. Maybe they work in one town but live in the other. So we did choose to use the pickup library rather than the home library of the patron for the prioritization purpose. So whenever a patron places the hold, the item owned by the home library is going to go wherever that's supposed to pick up first. And that solves our problem for local prioritization. People get what they want first. And all libraries in the consortium, I haven't had negative feedback on that, except for one library wants that to just be time limited. I know there's a bug out there that could make that possible, so that after a certain point, new items will no longer prioritize like this. But most of the libraries in my consortium love this. They, whenever they want their item to come to their patron, they just put a hold. It doesn't matter where it's at in the consortium, it'll come back for their patron first and prioritize. Again, doesn't go totally with our free and open sharing policies, but it did seem to alleviate a lot of the tension within the consortium. So we pushed this out as a solution to local hold availability kind of sucky. The problem with that is a lot of my libraries, the ones that wanted browsing shelves, didn't want to mess with the holds. And this does require active hold placement. So if you've got a list of people that want every new DVD, every time you add a DVD, you have to go in and put a hold for that patron so that it cycles through and prioritizes at your location first. And a lot of my libraries say, well, my patron just comes in and picks it up off the shelf. I want it to sit there, and then they tell their neighbor that it was good, and I just don't do holds. So again, not something we want to hear, but it is a reality. So this didn't fully solve all of our problems. So holds policies come into play next. The holds policies are set at the circ find page. So if you go to the circulation and finals page and then scroll all the way down, there's a holds policy table. And it's kind of magic the way it works because it just kind of did exactly what I wanted it to do. So for us, we created new item types, new item types, so that we could designate what were new items and what weren't new items. And that's what drives the holds policies. There is one caveat with that, that if you have two item types for the same item, then you're going to have two circ find rule lines, which means you're going to have two duplicated rules. So if you want to limit, if I want to limit visual media to 4 checkouts, some of my libraries are still way down there, then I can only limit it to like 2 new, 2 old, or 4 new, 4 old. So the limits aren't as hard as they used to be. But that was one of the trade-offs that we kind of had with this. So it basically allowed us to create 2 distinct types of sharers. So we have the immediate sharers, the people that send their stuff out as soon as they get it, no matter who wants it. And then we have the delayed sharers who have their shelf and they give it to their patrons first. And if their patrons don't want it, then it sits on their shelf until the 6 weeks is up. Another thing to note is only the delayed sharers needed that policy set. So this is a setup for one of my delayed sharing libraries. So we've got one of the rules, like new visual media from the home library, the pickup library matches any library, then the item returns home. It's not super clear what that's doing, and that's probably part of the reason why we just avoided it for so long. But what that is doing, what that is saying, is that whenever there's a hold on my new visual media, it's only going to focus on my patrons. And if it gets out, it's going to come back. Item returns home. So now we have this little intermission, and you probably are wondering why there's sharks and fish on my slides. I'm a dude from Kansas. We don't have oceans. So when I was trying to explain this to my users group, I decided to use my awesome biology undergraduate degree that I use every day in my library job to explain how this is going to work. So we had a lesson on symbiosis. We talked about mutualism. We talked about bees and flowers, how we should all be bees and flowers, how the bee benefits and the flower benefits from the relationship. We also talked about parasitism. We talked about mosquitoes and people and how we don't want anybody to be a mosquito. We don't want anybody to be a victim of a mosquito. And everyone in the consortium should be reciprocating. So then we landed on commensalism, which, like I said, we would rather be a mutualistic society. We want everybody to benefit from everybody. But in regards to new item sharing, we just knew that wasn't going to work. There were too many factors, too many people that just weren't on board. So we landed on commensalism, which is the shark benefit, or no, the shark is just kind of there, but the fish benefits from the shark's presence, it protects them. So that's where I landed on shark and fish. And it's been, I don't know, 6 months maybe since we put this into place. And every time I train a new librarian, they're like, but sharky fish, this doesn't make sense. So then I have to go back into my big long spiel about no, fish are friends, not food. And, so I may reevaluate this analogy, but it really does work in my head. So basically the fish are the delayed sharers and the sharks are the immediate sharers. And the ocean out here where the sharks live is free sharing, but then the fish kind of live in their own little ponds. So it takes about 6 weeks to get an item out of the fish pond to the ocean to make it fully shared. Okay, so the effects of the hold policies. Immediate sharers, the sharks, they gain access to new items of other sharks. So that's still there. That koha's being koha. We're getting our full sharing on. If with local hold prioritization, the sharks do get to prioritize their own little shark people first. But as soon as those holds are gone, it's going out. It's freely shared. They can place holds on any and all new items. There's no restriction. They can see the pond over there and place a hold on the hold in the pond, but they won't get that for 6 weeks. The only kind of drawback to being a shark is that their holds are being ignored by the fish for them. The delayed sharers, the fish, on the other hand, keep new items on their shelves for 6 weeks. So they get their local browsing shelf. They don't have to worry about holds if they don't want to. If holds get placed on their items, they don't show up on the holds queue, which was a big thing because one of the other issues we really had struggled with was people would get in the habit of just ignoring their holds queue. They were like, I don't share my new items. I'm just not going to pull anything new. And then at some point, they don't realize that it's not new anymore and it just sits there forever. So with this system, they just have to pull their holds queue no matter what's on it because they have the confidence that none of their new items will be on it. They're not going to see the holds or the immediate shares. So, and then the drawback of being a fish, and this is the policy enforcement part as well, is that they can't place holds. And that's on the staff side and the OPAC. So when a patron goes onto the OPAC, tries to place a hold on an item that the fish doesn't have, they get a notice that says, and this is a little rude, I guess, but they get this green box that says, your library has elected not to share your new items. So that means you're not allowed to place a hold on this item. New items come off in 6 weeks, and please contact your librarian if you want this changed, basically. Nice. So there's a little patron pressure on that side. And if you can't tell at this point, we are fans of the sharks, but not really fans of the fish at the office. But we do still want to be able to accommodate the fish because, like, I don't know, we have the policy in place, and things change over time. And sometimes we feel like the people that signed up at the very beginning aren't getting the same thing they signed up for. And I know other consortia have that as well. So I don't know. I guess I'm kind of a softie and I don't just want to put the hammer down. The other problem is even if I put the hammer down, they still do whatever they want. So putting in a system in place is important just to keep it regulated.
Jason, of your libraries, how many do you have that are immediate shares and how many do you have delayed, you know?
We have currently 5 fish and the rest are sharks.
Oh, good.
But we have a few sharks wearing fish, or a few fish wearing shark costumes.
The sharks in disguise.
And we are aware of them, but we haven't really taken action. We do have just like simple steps in place to kind of pressure them into switching over if we find that it becomes too much of a problem. Okay, so that covered, up to now we've knocked out the desire for local availability or local priority, the desire for local browsing shells, and the policy enforcement. So now I wanted to tackle clarity. So with everything kind of working how I wanted in the background, I started working on the front end and using a little code. I came up with just some little tooltips. So whenever let me back up. So to make this work, every library has to use those new item types, fish or shark. So whenever they add something, they're going to get the option, and I can probably show you if we have time my other setups in the back end. But we demand that they put it in new book because that's what actually creates the barrier. If it's not a new book, it's freely shared. If it is a new book, then sharks share it, but fish don't. So we wanted to make it immediately clear who was a fish and who was a shark. We never had that before. So we'd have libraries just waiting and waiting for a hold, and it would never come. So I added 4 of the fish libraries on the staff side and on the OPAC. There's these little, and I made this a GIF, so it's really like kind of annoying because it just moves on the phone. But there's a little circle with an exclamation mark, and when you highlight over it, it notifies the patron that that item and the staff that item isn't going to be available for the 6-week period. And then down here, it's kind of hard to see, but that's the nasty message I was talking about. So it says that your library doesn't share your new items, so you can't place a hold on this item. And for that one, it just tacks on to the none of these items can be placed on hold message. So there's probably a few scenarios where that message comes up and it shouldn't. But for the most part, it just goes into effect with the new item stuff. So that created the clarity and transparency that I wanted so that everybody knew what everybody else was doing. Okay, and then the final piece of the puzzle was solved with our latest upgrade, and that was with the automatic item modification tool, which is awesome. If you don't use it, you should. Basically what that does is you can tell it at a certain age, I want this to change to that. So for us, the certain age was 6 weeks, 42 days. And the change was the item type. So we want the new audios to go to audio. We want the new books to go to books. So that's all automated now. In the past, I would have to do that every day. Go in, run a report, batch modify everything. And some days I don't work, and some days I just didn't do it. So things were not well regulated. With the automatic item modification by age, though, it just does it. It's done. I don't have to worry about it. It's something off my list. So I highly recommend that if you have not set that up yet for things like this. One other note on that is it does require a cron job. So you can't just go in and start expecting it to work. You have to have BioWare set that up. And then our revised policy. So new item types maintain the flow of sharing while giving a choice. And that was one of the main goals of the whole, I don't know, however many year-long process. We still retained the 6 weeks limit. We did briefly discuss it at a users group to see if people wanted it changed, and everybody was, maybe we didn't briefly discuss it. We're leaving that one up. Yes. No, we asserted that it was 6 weeks, but we said that we would revisit it if it didn't work for everyone. There. And then this is basically just a recap of everything that I've said, but we did write it out into our policy so that it's available for our libraries to reference. So basically, it just hits all of them. And I don't know what time it is, but I might be a little short. Does anybody have questions at this point?
I guess the question I have is, is the desire on the library's part to be a fish? Do you find that's usually driven by library staff or library trustees?
Sometimes it's the board, sometimes it's the staff. I had one library explicitly send me an email and said the board said we had to do this, and she didn't sound too keen on it, but the board demanded it. Now, other libraries, it's pretty obvious that the librarian is the one pushing the change, and they always default to, well, this is best for my patrons. This is what my patrons want, which in most cases we found this is what the librarian wants, not what the patrons want, because the patrons don't really understand what it all means. But yeah, for the most part, I think it is the librarians driving the decision over the board.
That's what I find too. So.
Sure.
Are you going to share your
Yep.
presentation?
Yep, I'll get the slides to Chris to send out the instructions on that earlier. I can also share my jQuery and my CSS
Yes, please.
for the tooltips
Yes,
and stuff. I don't know. Any other questions? I feel like I did this yesterday too. My presentations were way too short. I can show you potentially the code, although I don't really want to get into my live server because privacy stuff. So, and my computer didn't work, so I can't bring up my test server. But I guess that's my presentation. If there are any. I can talk about inventory for a little while if anybody wants that.
Yeah, I missed yours yesterday.
I'll have that presentation available.